Hello and welcome to another episode of BARD Talk on Grammar and Thongs, where we look at the language of Shakespeare. Hopefully you've watched my previous videos on iambic pentameter, which explain that iambic pentameter is a line of poetry with 5 iambs in it, and that an iamb is a metrical foot or a beat of the poetry that includes one unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. There is also another video that looks at what I mean by stressed and unstressed syllables. So I'm going to assume you've got all of that knowledge, and this video is to answer the question, but why does Shakespeare do this in his plays? There's lots of reasons, and I'll look at 5 of those today. The first one is that iambic pentameter mirrors the natural pattern of speech. I've said in the past that we all use iambic pentameter every day without even realising it. In fact, even this question up here is in iambic pentameter. We've got the stressed syllables underlined. But why does Shakespeare do this in his plays? So Shakespeare wanted his characters to sound like they were speaking in a way that would be understood by their audience back in the time that he was writing. But he also wanted the structure so that he would be able to construct some of the rhyming lines that he wrote. So that's one reason. Second reason, very practical reason, is that it helped the actors remember their lines. Because they're almost like lyrics or lines in a song, then it makes them easier to remember with that pattern going. And that's also related to our third reason. It is quite lyrical, and so it's quite pleasing to the ear. We like the rhythm that we hear. There's something about the flow that appeals to us. This is a line from Twelfth Night that's written in iambic pentameter. If music be the food of love, play on. And it's got that lyrical aspect to it. The fourth reason that you may have heard is that iambic pentameter is used by Shakespeare to separate the important characters who speak in blank verse, written in iambic pentameter, from the less important characters who tend to speak in prose instead. So this is clearly illustrated in the opening scene in Romeo and Juliet, where, I'll just remind you, they're all fighting in the streets. There are, men from the Capulet side and the Montague side fighting. And the way they're talking is quite ordinary. It's prose. It's things like, yes, better, sir, you lie. Say better, here comes one of my master's kinsmen. So no particular lyrical quality or metre to it. But then Benvolio and Tybalt arrive, and they're 2 very important characters. And so the language changes. Benvolio says, put up your swords, you know not what you do. And Tybalt says, what art thou drawn among these heartless hinds? Turn thee, Benvolio, look upon thy death. So you can hear the pattern here. Benvolio replies, I do but keep the peace, put up thy sword, or manage it to part these men with me. And Tybalt replies, what, drawn and talk of peace? I hate the word, as I hate hell, all Montagues and thee. So you can hear the pattern. Important characters speaking in verse. Now, that is not always the case, but usually the important characters speak in verse, sometimes they speak in prose, and usually the less important characters speak in prose. But sometimes if the event they're talking about is important, they may speak in verse. The fifth reason, and I think the most useful for you as a student, especially, to be able to discuss Shakespeare, is he uses iambic pentameter in his plays so that he can break that pattern for effect. And I'll talk about that now. So when you've got a pattern, you can break it, and that can create emphasis or give you a strong effect. One way that Shakespeare uses this is to show emotion. So in the famous balcony scene that I've talked about a bit from Romeo and Juliet, when Juliet appears and Romeo sees her, he's speaking in verse, in iambic pentameter, saying, but soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. And he goes on in iambic pentameter for that whole soliloquy, except for one line right in the middle when he says, oh, that she knew she were, as in, oh, that she knew she were his love. The line before is, it is my lady, oh, it is my love. And then he breaks the iambic pentameter pattern to say, oh, that she knew she were. It's like this is at the point at which he's overcome with emotion, because this is a love story. And so breaking the pattern helps to emphasise the emotion that Romeo is feeling, the turmoil. Another way he uses it is for emphasis. So this example is from Hamlet, probably the most famous quote, "To be or not to be, that is the question." Again, the lines around here are in iambic pentameter, and this one starts off with that pattern. To be or not to be, but then it breaks here. That is the question. And by breaking it there, we get this great emphasis on that, which helps to emphasize that that is indeed the question. So it brings us focused right into that. A third way is another way to set characters apart. So like we were talking about earlier in the video, having some speak in iambic pentameter and some speak in prose, you can set characters further apart by having them speak in a different meter altogether, so that they're far removed from iambic pentameter. The witches in Macbeth are an example of this, when they say double, double, toil and trouble. So they still rhyme, but it's not iambic pentameter. In fact, it's trochaic tetrameter, which is sort of iambic pentameter flipped the other way in terms of the pattern, but then only four per line. So double, double, toil and trouble. So this is, compared to the rest of the play, weird, and they're weird. So it sets them apart as mysterious and weird, the weird sisters, the witches. So that's another way he uses it. Lastly, he can use play with meter to help create mood or atmosphere. So in Macbeth, when Macbeth is contemplating the crippling decision of whether he should kill someone or not, then he says, "Is this a dagger which I see before me?" And if you look up that scene, Act 2, Scene 1, the meter is all over the place. The pattern is all over the place. It's quite sort of jarring. And that's because of the discord in his mind as he contemplates this question. So these are some of the reasons that Shakespeare breaks iambic pentameter to create effect. Thank you.